Hi, everybody. Welcome to week 2. And this week, we're going to be talking about MLA format. We're going to be adhering to MLA ninth edition. Let's go ahead and get started. The two main components for MLA citations are in-text citations and end-text citations. Your in-text citations go directly at the end of the sentence containing quoted or paraphrased information. The end text citations go on the bibliography page where you list all of the sources that you used. In MLA format, the bibliography page is called a works cited page. There are various types of sources that you can cite. You can cite books, articles such as journals, trade publications, or magazines. You can cite newspapers, or you can cite websites that you find online. However, I would caution you to use the internet sparingly when it comes to finding sources, because you can't always trust what you find online. It would behoove you to familiarize yourself with our online database, because that will give you the most scholarly and up-to-date sources. There are three categories of sources that you will use. You'll use primary sources, which is raw data, the original source of information before it has been analyzed. Secondary sources, and these are sources that analyze or interpret primary data. They do not offer new evidence. And tertiary sources, and these are sources that compile data on a particular topic. For this upcoming essay, you will be required to use at least one primary source. The rest of them can be secondary or tertiary. Here's examples of the three categories. I'm going to lock in on Dr. King's example because his is the most relevant for what we're talking about. Most recently, we talked about rhetoric and we used Dr. King's letter from Birmingham jail. So, that very same letter can be used three different ways. If you, as the writer of this essay, decide to quote directly from Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail, you are using it as a primary source. However, if you look up Professor So-and-so's analysis of Dr. King's letter from Birmingham jail, then you're using a secondary source. And if you find that Dr. King's letter from Birmingham jail is referenced in an encyclopedia or something like that, then it's a tertiary source because it's a source within a source within a source. Not all information requires citations. There are things that are common knowledge, such as proverbs, sayings, and cliches. There's very well-known quotations, and there are very well-known allusions, like to literature, right? Also very well-known symbols, etc., right? However, I caution you to use these sparingly. I don't want anybody to come to me with an essay mostly made up of anecdotes and proverbs and sayings and cliches, okay? Because that would not be thorough research. For this presentation, we're going to talk about the most popular works cited entries. This list that you're going to see is definitely not an exhaustive list, but I'm focusing on the ones that we most use for the purpose of this presentation. For more information on source types, you can visit MLA Formatting and Style Guide from Purdue OWL. That has an exhaustive list of everything that you need to know and all the ways that you can cite anything in MLA format or APA, but we're not talking about that yet. All right, so the most common source types are books, websites, magazine articles, both print and from online. So, have you ever looked at a works cited page and wonder where all of that information comes from? Do you feel that it's something that is difficult to do? It's actually not. Once you know the 9 core elements to universally apply to any source material, you can cite just about anything. Okay? So these core elements are the items that you look for when preparing to cite your sources. Depending on the type of source you have, you may or may not use all the components. When building your works cited page, you look at the source and decide, what is my source and what are its common key features? Here are the 9 elements in order from top to bottom. And remember that punctuation matters. So whenever you're looking at a source, the first thing you do is put the author's name, last name, comma first, followed by a period, then the title of the source, followed by a period, the title of the container, more on that coming up, other contributors, etc. Okay, so follow this order and this punctuation style, and you can't go wrong. Let's unpack these 9 components. You have the author, that's who wrote it. Then you have the title of the source, that's the name of the article, book, documentary, etc. Then you have the container. What is the container? These are the elements that hold the source. The title of the container may represent the website or online database where your source has been published. It is not Google, okay? It is the name of the website, right, where the article you found was published. So, for example, we'll use a lot of articles from New York Times in this class. So, New York Times would be the container for the article that we used, okay? It can also be websites like SoundCloud, Facebook posts, blogs, articles, tweets, songs, Bible verses, or artwork. The rest of these are pretty self-explanatory. You just go down the list. So, who are these other contributors? They would be translators or editors. Oftentimes, we see editors when it comes to textbooks or anthologies, where in the front you'll have the author who compiled the works, but when you open up the front cover, you see that there were several editors involved. When it comes to journals and magazines, oftentimes you will have a version and a volume number. The publisher in a book can always be found on the inner cover. However, when it comes to the publisher of websites, oftentimes the publisher is the actual URL. However, sometimes if you scroll all the way to the bottom of a web page, it'll give you the name of the publisher. The publication date is the date the source is originally published or copyrighted. I like using New York Times because all of the sources have authors and publication dates. Not all internet sources will provide you with publication dates. If that is the case, scroll to the bottom and find the most recent update for the website. Usually it's the current year, or just use the year that we're currently in. So, what if I don't have all 9 components, Ms. Culver? Then you just use what you have. Most often, you're going to use the author, title of the source, title of the container, publisher, publication date, and the location. And that's because most primary sources are their own container and don't have other contributors. And if you're using a book, not a magazine or journal, then you're not going to have a version or volume number. However, you should always have a publisher and a publication date and the location from which you found the source. All essays in MLA format that use Researched information or outside information, that means outside of your own head and your own knowledge, must be cited both in an in-text citation and an end-text citation, which is your works cited page. So a works cited page is a formatted list of all sources you cited within your paper. Anytime you quote, paraphrase, summarize, or include information that you've read from an outside source, you must include that source in your references list, correctly formatted in MLA style. Another thing to avoid being caught for plagiarism, if you cite it within the essay, it must be cited on the works cited page and vice versa. So you can't just throw in sources on the works cited page that you have not actually used inside of the essay. Okay? Your works cited page goes at the end of your paper. It's not a separate article. It goes on the same document. It's just a separate page. So for example, and I've seen a lot of students do this, where the final paragraph of your essay, your conclusion, for example, might carry over to the first quarter of the page. And some students will just continue the works cited page right there. But you don't want to do that. You actually want to go ahead and click the enter button or return key if you have a Mac. And you're going to want to give the works cited page its own page. Okay? So this is what your works cited page should look like. You have 1-inch margins all around, just like with the rest of the essay. The font should be the same. The font size should be the same. That's for all of you who copy and paste your citations. Make sure that you fix the font so that it matches the rest of the essay. Notice that the header, which is in the upper right, the page number has continued on from the last page of the essay. There are hanging paragraphs and it's double spaced. For this essay, you are required to have an annotated bibliography. If you've never heard of an annotated bibliography, sit tight, I'm going to explain it to you real good. So an annotated bibliography is your list of citations, books, articles, documents, right? Like I just showed you on the last couple of slides. But with an annotated bibliography, each citation is followed by a brief descriptive and evaluative paragraph. This is the annotation. The purpose of your annotation is to inform the reader of the relevance, accuracy, and quality of the sources cited. Step 1, you're going to create the citation like you would on a regular works cited page. Step 2, you're going to create the annotation. This is one paragraph that goes directly beneath each source. It should include a summary. What are the main arguments? What is the point of the book or article? What topics did you cover in your essay? If someone asked, what is this article about? What would you say? Then an evaluation. After summarizing the source, you need to evaluate it. How is it useful to your research? What makes this source credible? And then finally, an explanation. Once you've summarized and assessed a source, you need to explain how it fits into your research. In what way was this source helpful to you, and how does it help you shape your argument? Usually 50 to 100 words will suffice for an annotation. All three of these components go in one paragraph, okay? That's for you overachievers who I absolutely love, but you don't need to have 3 paragraphs for each annotation, okay? Here's an example of what an annotated bibliography should look like. Notice that it still follows all of the rules of MLA formatting. Also notice that the hanging paragraph is still intact, and that means that it is indented Okay, the first line is all the way to the left, and then the second and following lines are indented. The following 8 slides, including this one, are going to give you the formula for citing our most popular sources and an example of each one. I'm going to be quiet and just allow you to look through these at your own pace. Feel free to pause this video at any time. Now that we've talked about the different categories of sources, the different types of sources, and how to correctly document them, let's talk about how to choose the right sources. So earlier in the video, I said that it would behoove you to use our online library database because it will give you the most relevant and up-to-date scholarly sources. And I said that because sometimes when you just do a big Google search, you have this big sweep of the World Wide Web and you never really know what you're getting. However, sometimes it is necessary for us to do the big internet sweep. So when that happens, you need to make sure that you check for CRAAP. Okay? You're going to give it the crack test. And that means you're checking the currency. Is the information timely? The relevance. Is it important and relevant information for your needs? The authority. This is the source or the publisher of this information. Be careful of certain websites that or web pages that don't have an author. I'm always wary of those. If you tell me that you've used a source and it doesn't have an author, I'm likely going to tell you to find a different one. Accuracy, the reliability and truthfulness and correctness of the content. Be careful of bias out there. And the purpose, and this is the reason the information exists. And finally, as we close, I want to leave you with something helpful. You can find this in this week's resources. It is a MLA Works Cited page cheat sheet. So it pretty much just has everything that you need to know, nice and condensed into one sheet. Okay? Feel free to download it and use it for this class and all of your other classes that use MLA format. All right, you won't be steered wrong. Thank you for listening to this lecture. I look forward to seeing you in class.